All right, here we are with another Fox 5 Amplified. I'm Joe Vigil and Chief Meteorologist Sam Argier.
Good to be with you, Joe.
Here. Yeah, so we're in this hot season, and boy, the temperature is 110 now today. I mean, it's getting pretty brutal in some cases.
Yeah, it's like we know it's going to be hot in the summer.
True.
It's always a question of how hot it's going to be.
Yeah.
We're coming off the 7th hottest June on record. So June, infamous for being dry and hot for us. It's our driest month we see all year long in Las Vegas. And we only picked up 2/100ths of an inch of rain this past June, which we kind of squeezed in right at the end of the month. It actually broke a more than 120-day dry streak that we saw.
That's a lot.
Didn't see a whole lot of rain in spring, and also you may remember this past March was super hot too. We were almost hit 100 degrees in March, which would have been nuts. June hotter than average. Going into July now. July, climatologically speaking, the hottest month on average. Specifically mid to late July, that's when we see the average high temperature at its highest at 105. Now, when I say average, that's the 30-year average. So that's what we kind of go as a baseline when we talk about above average or below average temperatures. So right now, as we record this, it's July 8th today. So if someone's maybe not watching this the day we record this, it's a hot and dry week out there. We're right around 110. This is the hottest we've been all year long. And now compare that to 2 years ago. I was talking about this on the air. I put a social media post about it that July of 2024, July 7th, we hit 120 degrees at Reed Airport. That's the hottest we've ever been. For so long, it was 117 was the hottest on record. So, yeah, that July we did 120. That still stands as the hottest official temperature. And when we talk about records, the records go back to 1937. So far, July, right now, we're a bit above average, around 110. But all the records this time of year are kind of in that 115 to 120 range.
Of course, we hope we don't go back to 120. Is there any way to tell whether or not we're going to kind of get that hot this summer?
Long range, impossible to say specifically how hot we're going to be. We'll look at kind of the patterns, longer range outlooks. The Climate Prediction Center puts out a little more longer range outlook, and they've got about a 40 to 50% probability of above average temperatures this summer. So we are leaning warmer than average. Now, rainfall, the monsoon, is another big part of our summer weather. And for those watching, when you hear the term monsoon, a lot of times people think when we see a thunderstorm, that's a monsoon. That's not a monsoon. That's just a thunderstorm. What the monsoon is a seasonal reversal of the wind. And what that means is most of the year during the spring, especially the fall season and wintertime especially, we see storms come in off the Pacific Ocean. We see that westerly wind. That's the predominant wind flow. But during July, August, and into early September, that's prime time. We see the wind shift more out of the south-southeast, so that picks up subtropical moisture out of the south. We know it when you start to feel the stickiness out there, that humidity picks on up. And that, of course, is some fuel to get some thunderstorms going. That's what we need. If you have dry air, you're not getting thunderstorms. So I am looking at a pretty significant flip of the switch next week. As we go into next week, we've got monsoonal moisture looking to return really for much of next week. So thunderstorm chances are picking up into Monday as we go into next week, and throughout much of next week. The monsoon is waking up, Joe.
Yeah, well, we want it.
We'll take it.
Yeah, being so dry at the lake, of course. And what are you forecasting? I mean, what are we looking at as far as forecast for the rest of the summer here?
Yeah, so I mentioned temperatures leaning a bit above average. Rainfall also leaning a bit above average. So this monsoon season, what kind of the bigger player in that is that we're in an El Nino pattern. There's an El Nino advisory. You might have seen some headlines about this being a super El Nino that we're going in. And when you hear the term El Nino, that just looks at the sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific down near the equator. So, more than 1,000 miles down to our south. But that can have an impact on the weather patterns. Now, the impacts during El Nino are much more prominent during the wintertime. There's less of an impact during summer. But that being said, we are expecting more Pacific tropical activity, more storms, tropical storms, hurricanes in the eastern Pacific, down where the water's much warmer. Reason why we don't get hurricanes in California, water's just too cold off the coast. But much like we saw in 2023, we saw Hurricane Hillary, you may remember, move up to the north. It was not a hurricane when it hit Southern California, and we saw the remnants here in Southern Nevada as well. Mount Charleston got hammered with heavy rain.
It did.
Death Valley saw a lot of flooding there as well. We got some rain in the valley, but definitely Mount Charleston bared the brunt of that storm. But basically, remnant moisture, if we see more activity in the Eastern Pacific, that can work its way up into our area. So I'm really, like I mentioned, looking at that kind of flip of the switch for next week. We've got essentially the setup, a ridge of high pressure over the Four Corners region. So right around, where Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado meet. That's where we like to see the ridge of high pressure. That kind of brings in that moisture out of the south. And I'm seeing that really start to switch next week. Now, we'll see if that can hold through the summer months. It typically kind of ebbs and flows. And, Joe, I know you worked for a number of years in Albuquerque and, covering the New Mexico area. And, New Mexico, even Arizona, they typically see a lot more monsoon activity than we do. They're kind of closer to that moisture feed coming out of the Gulf. We're oftentimes kind of on the fringe of the moisture.
Yeah.
So for us, it really just depends on how much of that moisture we can get. Of course, I hear from viewers every year, it's very localized rainfall. So it doesn't mean, this isn't the type of rain that's a blanket of rain over the entire valley. Now, sometimes on very active days, we can get pretty widespread rain and thunderstorm activity, but a lot of times it's very localized. And that's the thing about a thunderstorm. It can drop heavy rain in one neighborhood, you go a couple miles away and you can be in the sunshine.
Right.
So it really depends on where the storm's set up. I always tell people, it when you start to see those cumulus clouds building up over the mountains.
Right.
That's when there's some moisture. A lot of times it's the air you can wear. We always say, a little bit muggy out there.
Yep.
And that's when to be weather aware. So we're always monitoring those changes. But right now we've got the first alert out for next week, looking at that change.
Yeah, you mentioned the spotty showers. That's a big deal with homeless people. Of course, if they're in a tunnel, I'm here and it looks sunny and bright, it may not be that way a couple miles away.
Yep.
And then the channels get filled up with water, and then of course you run into problems because of that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why flash flooding is such a concern.
Sure.
And to your point, a lot of the unhoused population does live in the tunnels. I know you've done stories on that. And, I know that there's a pretty robust, Shine a Light, the nonprofit.
Correct.
You've done stories on them. They do a lot of great work down there and alerting people when the weather does change, because the valley is like a big slope. It slopes west to east. So all the flood channels, all the flood infrastructure that's in place in the Las Vegas Valley, all that water eventually goes to the Las Vegas Wash, goes to Lake Mead. So even if you're, downstream of, it could be pouring in Summerlin, and you might be in the tunnels, maybe in the East Valley, all that water will eventually make it through those flood channels.
Yeah, it can be tough for those folks for sure. So a couple things. So you had mentioned the top summers, hot summers, 19 out of the last 20 years. If you can talk about that and then explain, why we're so hot.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I was kind of mentioning, I was looking up some stats before we recorded this, and 19 out of the hottest 20 summers on record have been since 2000.
Okay.
The other one was in 1994 when we were actually in the top 20. So big reason for that, climate change apart, but also how much the valley has grown.
Right.
Our overnight low temperatures, if you look at the trend, have gone up exponentially over the last 20, 30 years. Big function of that, Las Vegas, back in the 90s, we were less than 1 million people. And we're pushing 3 million people now around the Las Vegas Valley in the metro area. So a lot more concrete. And this is kind of an interesting stat I always like to share, is that the last time we saw a record low temperature in Las Vegas, meaning the coolest temperature for that date, was way back in 1999. So we've not seen a record low temperature since 1999, and the big reason why is just the urban heat island effect.
Right.
All the concrete, it absorbs the heat during the day, so that keeps temperatures up during the overnight hours. And we've seen a lot of record high minimum temperatures. That is a very common occurrence over the last 10, 20 years here in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So that plays a big part in why, because when we talk about the hottest summers, we're looking at the average high and low temperatures.
Right.
So it takes both into account.
Yeah, chill it out. We like talking about cooler weather. One thing today, actually, I was talking with Mountain View Hospital, and they have these cooling rooms where they can just hit a button if someone's suffering from heat illness, and that room can get down to 50 degrees in just several minutes. So, of course, if they bring somebody in, say an ambulance is coming in, they know it's coming, they can hit the button, and it'll cool it off right away. So when they get there, it's already cool, in the emergency department. So, of course, that's a big problem for us, the heat, and, people do pass
absolutely
because of the heat.
Yeah, and, in living in Las Vegas, a lot of locals, we know that the heat's coming. We know not to overexert ourselves when it's 110 degrees out in the afternoon, find the AC. But, of course, we have a lot of tourists that come in town.
Yes.
So even when the National Weather Service has a product called the heat risk. And what that assesses is not only how hot it's going to be, but the time of year we're seeing the heat, also how much relief we're getting overnight, and also how long of a duration the heat event is. Because if you stack a good, week and a half of temperatures that are teens with overnight low temperatures that are barely getting into the upper 80s, which we'll see, that's when you'll see extreme heat warnings. And that's when the heat, it kind of compounds over time. So when we don't get that relief overnight, it can cause heat-related illness. So even on days when we have that kind of a setup, the National Weather Service will issue extreme heat warnings. We certainly heighten our messaging on our side here on Fox 5. But a lot of times it might be a minor heat risk, but that can be a little, some people can misinterpret that, especially for people that are coming from colder climates. We know what happens in Las Vegas. The old slogan, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Right.
So people are, indulging in beverages, sometimes maybe not legal substances. So, that can also take a toll as well. So, heat is such a big part. And it's kind of a silent killer because it's not super visual heat. You can't see it like a severe thunderstorm coming toward you or a tornado warning or anything like that. So, heat, even though we live in Las Vegas, we expect the heat. It's always a good reminder. This time of year especially, even when you've lived in Las Vegas for a number of years, you got to take the heat seriously.
Yeah, very true. In fact, a few weeks ago, I talked with my tournament golf director, youth golf director, and he's been here. He knows it gets hot, and he tells his kids, make sure you hydrate, 2 to 3 days before you have a tournament if you know it's going to be hot. Well, he admits he didn't follow his own advice and was out caddying for a young golfer and ran into problems. He got sick on the course. He wasn't sweating, which you need to sweat to cool you down. He vomited. He was nauseous. He got dizzy. And the lesson that he wanted to say is, hey, if you start feeling those things, get out of the heat immediately, which he didn't do. He could have gone to the golf club and just sat in there. But he waited and waited. Again, something he admits, and he wanted to talk about it just to get the word out.
Yeah.
He ended up going to the hospital, and his kidneys were basically starting to shut down.
Ooh, that's scary.
He just didn't get in fast enough. So that he talked to us because he wanted to make sure that people do that. Again, it's not just when you're out there drinking. I mean, if you know you're going to be out in the heat, hydrate a day day or even 2 days before. That's what he tells his young golfers.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there's more of an awareness too, for electrolytes and staying hydrated in that regard. But yeah, you're taking me back to my junior golf days out here, Joe.
Right.
When I was a kid, I played golf here in Las Vegas, and it was great. We played all the nicest courses. A lot of them aren't even around anymore, like the Desert Inn, which is now the Wynn, and the Dunes Golf Course, which for T-Mobile is, I think, on the third or fourth hole right now.
I didn't know that.
Which was a really cool course. But no, to my point, we tee off at like 2, 3 in the afternoon because we were kids, and I remember having my big jug of water as a kid. You have to do it, So that's great advice.
Yeah, just get out early, whatever you're doing, if it's going to be hot. All right, Sam Argier, thanks for being here. We
Joe,
appreciate that.
Always a pleasure.
All right.